The Daevite Empire was an ancient civilization that began in south-central Siberia and eventually stretched throughout Central Asia, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. The empire represented a stratified society structured through systematic slavery, military conquest through various anomalous beings, ancestor worship, ritualized human sacrifice, and widespread usage of thaumaturgical practices. The history of the Daevite Empire is nebulous and awash with mystery. Archaeological evidence supports their existence beginning circa 10,000 BCE, but the termination point of the civilization's control over their territory varies wildly. This unclear timeline is primarily the result of SCP-140, the book entitled The Chronicle of Daevas, which has the anomalous effect of retroactive temporal casualty. Readers of the book are compelled to add additional material using any liquid, including the reader's own blood. With each addition to the story contained within the Chronicle, history is retroactively changed to compensate. Previous review of SCP-140 reflected that the Daevas were eventually defeated by the Chinese general Qin Kai in the 3rd century BCE. This defeat led to the eventual genocide of all Daevas and the crumbling of the empire. But as a result of subsequent contained breaches involving SCP-140, new material has been added, which describes survivors regrouping and migrating to another region of central Siberia, rebuilding their empire steadily, and continuing to advance culturally and technologically. At present, the empire is described as been having crushed by Genghis Khan in the early period of his conquest, although the fates of many important persons in several cities remain ambiguous. It is important to understand that by the very nature of SCP-140, the history of the Daeva has changed numerous times. What history we can read about the development of their empire must be taken in scholarly skepticism, if only because the atemporal nature of the Daevas cultural development. Through the research and containment of other anomalies related to the Daevas, the Foundation has found numerous pieces of evidence that the cultural remains of this empire have survived into modernity. Daevite societal structure. Although the Daevite Empire began as a loosely connected series of city-states with shared cultural practices and religion, the shift towards imperialism was evident from early in their history. Unified, the Daevite Empire conquered, enslaved, and oppressed all other peoples it came in contact with. The following is an excerpt from SCP-140. The might of the Daeva military was such that no equal could stand in its way, but it was not always the behemoth it would grow to be. In the early days of the Empire, after unification and establishment of the ruling Council of Mothers, the fledgling Daevas formed armies made of grass children and wooden behemoths stolen from the children of the night to bolster their ranks. An early tactic was to target the enemy's culture, the enemy culture's small farming communities, pillaging their livestock and taking many slaves. It was in this way that the Daeva learned to starve their enemies before even approaching their battlements. It is said that rituals were performed to divine the outcome of any given battle, and if the outcome was not to a matriarch's liking, the tactics would be changed. It was in this way that the Daeva military strength became synonymous with not only overwhelming force, but also unpredictable asymmetrical warfare. Their culture was highly stratified with an aristocratic ruling class appropriately called the Daevas. It is unclear how factual the records included in SCP-140 are, but if the book is to be believed, the Daevas were anomalous beings set apart from the non-anomalous human citizenry and slaves. It is also common to find reference to the claim that the Daevas were a divergent species from baseline humanity, with anomalously long lifespans. This is unconfirmed and smacks of propaganda, but the possibility cannot be ruled out given all of their anomalous might. Interestingly, the Daevas were strongly matriarchal, often naming their leaders as matriarchs instead of monarchs. Power was firmly invested in female political and religious leaders. Often the matriarchs served both roles. The following is an excerpt from SCP-140. It is said that one cannot see a matriarch against her purpose, that to witness the actions of a matriarch is to fit oneself within their plans, even if said observations go unnoticed. The Daevites were not merely given the title of matriarch as formality, but were in fact mothers to all of human civilization. Childbirth is a painful and often bloody event, hence their actions birth a conceptual model of society into the collective unconscious. Sacrifice and birth, two primary cultural conceptions that we can trace back to the Daevic matriarchy. For every meaning in the word, they were our mothers. Daevic religious practices. Detailed religious practices are hard to ascertain, but usually involve human sacrifice, smaller blood sacrifices, and even ritual cannibalism. One consistent cultural signifier of Daevite worship we can identify is the focus on dance. From depictions in art, a section of SCP-140 and other documents, and what testimony it is possible to gather from first-hand accounts, it is clear that Daevite ritual often involves dance. Dancing represented living, and the Daevites venerated life. From what the historical department has been able to find, the Daevites did not even have the concept of an afterlife. Their entire religion was consisted of valuing life, the material world, and its creator. Dance was the way Daevites communicated with the originator, or as they called it, font. This primordial figure or force is shrouded in mystery, but many have speculated this divine being was the basis for Yaldabaoth from both the Nalka and Mechanite myths. At the time of writing, no single Daevite work has been found that clearly defines the structure of the font, the nature of the font. From interpretation of passages from SCP-140 and other archaeological finds, the font is interpreted to be an inanimate force, a spring from which life and the material plane bubbled from the outside of the universe, pushing the primordial stuff of creation through the cracks in the shell of the universe and injecting life into our existence. It is a source of life rather than a creator figure. There are no surviving devotional objects or idols that represented the font, and none have been referred to in what Information Foundation historians have been able to collect. As far as we are able to discern, font was less a god of life and more an abstract representation of life itself. There is no indication whether the font had agency or consciousness, and arguably this would not have mattered to the Daeva. They worshipped life through the blood, a medium by which life traveled. Following is an excerpt from A Chronicle of the Daeva by Wentworth Sullivan. They danced to show the world they were alive. They danced to demonstrate their powers over others. The Daeva danced to worship their gods, especially the font, and to speak directly to them. Their gods represented two things. Their gods only represented two things: sacrifice and the act of dancing. Blood was to feed their gods, and the dancing was to speak to them. So the gods were forever separated from their children by a metaphysical void they called the Neverment. The act of worshipful dancing could pierce the veil, that in the ever-present shedding of blood. The following is another excerpt. How can we really ever know what was real or what has been created through anomalous manipulation of history? But surely, the most outlandish theories concerning the Daevite religion are formed around their worship of an entity called the Starlit King. If such entity even existed, and there's no real evidence it did, there's no link between what we concretely know about the Daeva matriarchy and what little has been written about the Starlit King. This writer finds the concept of matriarchal society worshipping a two-dimensional patriarchal deity implausible at best, Orientalist at worst. Revolution. Based on research into historic cults, the Foundation Historical Department is convinced that a widespread revolt of slave class occurred somewhere in the period around 1800 BCE. This revolt, the details of which are mostly lost to history, led by the semi-mythic messiah figure of Grand Karcist Ion, ultimately resulted in the shifting of power around central city-state of Athetum, a previously Daeva regional capital city. The Daevite Empire survived this event despite the significant loss of territory and resources. Additionally, given the shifting nature of the Daevite history, the accuracy of these events is hard to pin down. It is clear that such an event took place, but what grander effect it had on the Daevite Empire is difficult to ascertain. For example, no mention of the Sarctic Revolt was archived in SCP-140. However, such a thing is likely to have been omitted, as SCP-140 is a work authorized by those with Daevite sympathies. In fact, it is surmised that the work put into creating SCP-140's retrocausal anomalous effect was in service of changing the primary timeline such that the Daevite Empire might be preserved. Although this begs the question, would the Nalka religion even exist without the Deva? If the Deva didn't exist before the Revolution, due to retrocausal manipulation of history, would they have inadvertently caused a Nalka culture? Practices. Thaumaturgy. Numerous pieces of Daevite ritual practices have been preserved into modernity. Several anomalies resulting from Daevite thaumaturgical practices have been contained by the Foundation, leading credence to more outlandish claims made in SCP-140. Daevite thaumaturgy is often centered around two common practices: horticulture and blood sacrifice. Thaumaturgy was utilized to manipulate agricultural yields in various ways, including the use of anomalous trees and plant life for everyday purposes such as protection and management of bloodlines. It was not only for religious purposes that Daevites performed ritual killings. Daevite thaumaturgical practices, like their religious practices, often one and the same, often involve a sacrifice of human life or blood, for want of a better word. Daevites practice necromancy, the trading of life for power, or a thaumaturgical practice of fueling rituals with human lives. It was in this manner that they modified tree golems, see SCP-3140, left by those they called the Children of the Night, and infused clay and moth to create humanoid servants, highly resistant to pain and lacking motivation of their own. See SCP-5267. SCP-140 itself is often powered by human blood, although any liquid that one could write it with will serve. However, the creation of SCP-140's retrocausal anomalous effect is certainly the product of human sacrifice. Following is an excerpt of SCP-140. Hence, it was the year 7033 that the Deva matriarch ruling over the grand capital of Adidam performed great working. 500 war slaves were sacrificed and obeisance to the font. After 3 nights, the moon turned the color of blood, and the matriarch knew her quarry had been found. In the mountains of Clopodum, the celestial spawn hid its tower, built to form a new army and challenge the righteous might of the matriarch. And lo, she did send an awesome force to the citadel and defeated the fledgling army, though her quarry did escape with its child. Moreover, powerful ontokinetic anomalies discovered by Foundation personnel and tied to Deva practices have been shown to work on the basis of human sacrifice, see SCP-5626. Recently acquired documents and artifacts have provided necessary context to hypothesize Daevite practices. Unlike a number of non-anomalous cultures, the Daevites appear to have believed in transmigration of essences, without the concept of soul or an afterlife. The body was entirely secondary to the blood, as the blood was the medium through which all life flowed. Essence was transposed from life to life, incarnated and fungible. But eternal singular identity was rejected. A virtuous existence, their primary virtue being one of faithful servitude to the font and to the physical world, was to be rewarded by this life by way of luxury and power. Through thaumaturgy effects, their thaumaturgy reflects this, with spells and other thaumic workings often conceived as living things in themselves. Retrocausal ontokinetic anomalies. Of note are the retrocausal effects of Daevite thaumaturgical rituals. The Foundation has discovered at least 2 anomalies created by created with the purpose of retrieving victory from defeat by changing the outcome of events. Both SCP-140 and SCP-5711 represent such rituals. Philosophically, the Deva had little respect for the concept of time. They viewed events as malleable in everyday life, at least for the Devas themselves. Somehow, over their multiple millennia-spanning history, the ruling classes of the Empire were able to harness thaumaturgical rituals and rewrite events retroactively change the results. Whatever origins the Deva may have had before, they have been almost certainly retrocausally erased due to their meddling with temporal thaumaturgy. This also at least partially explains the variable universes discovered where the Deva either continue to exist or existed in a fashion completely differently from them in baseline reality. An excerpt from the Chronicles of the Deva by Dr. Wentworth Sullivan. Amongst these scholars in the know of anomalous history, there have been some outlandish theories bandied about concerning the origin of the Devas. I always like to point out that there is often not much we know about the origins of any ancient civilizations besides what can be told from the archaeological record. But if we put that aside for a moment, a more terrifying reality comes into focus. What if the Deva had used their atemporal retroactive anomalous rituals so often and so early in their history that they may have completely rewritten their origins? Or more fantastically, what if the Deva never existed in this reality at all before Chronicle of Deva was first published and distributed? What if the anomalous factors at play in that tome are the origins of the Deva? Or what if the tome is a vehicle by which the Deva have invaded this reality, only retroactively rewriting history? Additionally, Foundation researchers have derived at least one beneficial anomaly from Daevite thaumaturgy based on retrocausal manipulation through cognitohazardous images, see SCP-2140. Modern-day influences. Despite the apparent demise of the Daevite Empire, their influence has marked an impact on modern-day cultures and practices. The most obvious example of this influence is the sect or Pur of the Immortal Deva, a cult led by a mysterious figure classified as SCP-140-A, which is responsible for the production and distribution of SCP-140 instances. The order has operated from the late 18th century to the present. SCP-140-A has been noted to appear within the content of SCP-140, but it's unclear whether this individual is a descendant of the Deva, a survivor of the Empire, or merely a modern devotee. Long before the Foundation began operating within the United States, the Order has influenced certain echelons of society in the US and Europe. During the rise of occultism in the 19th century, the Order performed seances, promised the elevation of the spirit, and preached about the ascendancy of the body towards the divine. Before the Order retreat out of the public eye, over 200 missing persons reports were filled with connection with their operations. Before the Order's retreat out of the public eye, over 200 missing persons reports were filled in connection to their operations in New York City, London, and Paris. Yet no charges were ever filed. Investigations by Foundation researchers have found little direct evidence of wrongdoing or anomalous practices. The Order continues to operate a small center in Paris that is under constant surveillance. SCP-140-A is the subject of an ongoing manhunt. Agricultural. Other cultural influences have survived through anomalous communities passing down Daevic agricultural techniques, such as the thaumaturgical modification of honeybees to produce arts and crafts, shaped hives, or the architectural style of the ancient Daevic building techniques, and reproduce scenes from Daevite historical annals. These bees have been known to modify plant life to make them more susceptible to Daevic modifications for specific anomalous purposes, to encourage faster and more consistent growth, regardless of temperature and elevation. The Daevites had a cultural focus on anomalous plant life, including developing trees that grew human heads to memorialize a favorite slave of a matriarch. Trees that were animate trees that were animate gardens with organic weaponry, and trees that would display the memories of an individual who performed a blood sacrifice. The last was capable of predicting potential mates and identifying likely genetic defects. It was in this way that the ruling Daevos maintained their bloodlines. Lesser Chief Solomon. The Ars Dotia is a well-known grimoire written in the 1600s by an unknown author and collected into one tome with 4 others, entitled, I'm going to butcher this out, Lemetodon Cavitula Solomonis. The Ars Dotia's primary focus is the demonology and classification of 72 demons. The tome denotes sigils for each of the demons named. Each sigil signifies the seal of a named demon. Careful examination of the sigils revealed Daevos script has been adapted to form the shapes. Was this done consciously, or did the authors of the grimoire merely adapt occult symbols that had drifted down the centuries? Review of thaumaturgical histories from the Wanderer's Library have revealed Daevite influence, and even some very rare translations of their rites. This lends credence to the theory that a significant portion of modern thaumaturgical work is based, at least in part, on Daevite practices. Modern activities attributable to Daevite agents. In the 1990s, Site 91 in Yorkshire, England was a center for investigations into thaumaturgical and xenobiological threats to normalcy. During the investigation, a surviving matriarch was discovered to be behind a Russian conglomerate's expansion. In the process of attempting to locate the matriarch and other anomalous forces she was arms against, staff of Site 91 discovered an abandoned Daevos stronghold in eastern Mongolia, in the process by which the Daevos created their grass children. As such, these reports concerning the investigation offered our greatest insight into the potential threat of an active Daevite force on the Foundation's attempts to attain normalcy. The Daevite were effectively the first civilization, even older than Ur or Sumer, and the influence of their activities on modern cultures cannot be discounted. But it is the Daevites' inability to completely fade into history that makes them relevant for Foundation research. Whether retrocausal, ontokinetic, or the anomalous manipulation of plant life, the Daeva are a consistent aspect of the anomalous world. They touched every major anomalous group that dates to antiquity, and reverberations of their actions continue to surface. Personnel are to remain vigilant for any signs of Daevite anomalies, as we do not know if the dawn promised by SCP-140-8's cult is an aspirational goal or a precognitive warning.